In my family, love wasn't a feeling. It was an invoice. And I had just been handed the most expensive one of my life, disguised as a family vacation. My mother, Brenda, presented it with the flourish of a game show host revealing the grand prize, her eyes shining with a particular kind of avarice she reserved just for me. "Olivia, darling, your father and I had the most wonderful idea," she announced, sliding a glossy cruise brochure across our old kitchen table. The table was the same one I'd done my homework on for years, the one where I'd celebrated good grades, hoping for a flicker of pride. Now, it was a negotiation table, and I was on the wrong side of it. For a foolish, hopeful second, my heart lifted. A real vacation. All of us. Maybe this was a peace offering, a sign that they finally saw me as more than just a solution to their financial problems. I picked up the brochure, the paper cool and slick beneath my fingers, smelling of fresh ink and distant, salt-sprayed air. The cover showed a massive, gleaming white ship sailing on an impossibly blue ocean. It was a picture of escape, of luxury, of peace. A world away from the constant, low-grade hum of my family's expectations. I allowed myself to imagine it, the warm sun, the sound of the waves, being together without the usual tension. "We found a perfect 7-day trip through the Caribbean," Brenda continued, her voice syrupy. My brother, Leo, who had been slouched over his phone, suddenly looked up, a greedy light in his eyes. He was already spending my money. My mother leaned forward, her smile widening as she delivered the hook. "And we thought, since you are doing so wonderfully at your job, that you could treat us all. It would be such a beautiful gift, for you to be able to give this memory to your family." There it was. The casual, breathtaking audacity of it. The invitation was a transaction. My presence was conditional upon my ability to pay for everyone. Not just for my ticket, but for hers, my father's, and Leo's. The four of us. She wasn't finished. She opened the brochure to a page she had already dog-eared, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the most expensive accommodation. "Look, they have a family suite. 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a private balcony. We could all be together." The unspoken part hung heavy in the air. "You can afford it. You owe us this." My success wasn't a source of pride for them, it was a resource. My accomplishments were not my own, they were a family fund they felt entitled to withdraw from at will. I looked from my mother's expectant face to my brother's eager grin. My father, Gary, just stared into his coffee cup, offering his usual silent endorsement of my mother's schemes. They weren't inviting me on a vacation. They were hiring me to fund one. The warmth I had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by a familiar, cold stone in the pit of my stomach. I was the responsible daughter, the successful one, and this was my reward. To be seen not as a person, but as a provider. The brochure in my hand suddenly felt heavy, cheap. The beautiful ship now looked like a prison, and the price of a ticket wasn't just the thousands of dollars for the suite. The real price was my dignity. They didn't want me. They wanted what I could buy them. They wanted to post photos of a perfect family vacation on social media, a vacation sponsored by the daughter they only seemed to remember when they needed something. I looked down at the glossy page, at the smiling, happy families who had presumably paid for their own tickets. The price of admission to my own family had been set. And it was a 5-figure sum. The brochure wasn't an invitation, it was a ransom note. This wasn't the first invoice I'd received. It was just the largest and most audacious. The pattern had started subtly, years ago, right after I landed my first major promotion. My mother, Brenda, had called me, her voice filled with a performative pride that always set my teeth on edge. That pride lasted exactly as long as it took for her to ask for the first loan. "It was for a car repair," she'd said, "just a few $100s until your father gets paid." I was so thrilled by my new salary, so eager for their approval, that I sent the money without a second thought. It was never mentioned again, and it was certainly never repaid. That small, unpaid loan was the first crack in the dam. Soon, the requests became more frequent, more significant. It was always framed as a temporary setback for them, a small favor for me. My brother Leo's tuition needed a top-up. The property taxes were higher than expected. The refrigerator suddenly died. My success was never celebrated as my own achievement. It was treated as a stroke of collective good fortune, like our family had won a small lottery. I was just the one holding the ticket. My hard work, the late nights at the office, the sacrifices I made, all of that was invisible to them. My brother, Leo, was the black hole at the center of this financial universe. While I was working part-time jobs through college, he was given a generous allowance. While I was building my career, he was finding himself, a process that seemed to require a constant infusion of cash from my parents, which I later realized was indirectly coming from me. His failures were always met with sympathy and excuses. "He's just so creative, the world isn't set up for people like him," my mother would say. But my success was met with a new set of expectations. My paycheck wasn't a reward for my labor, it was the family safety net. They stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a solution. Every phone call from my mother would start with a casual, "How are things at work?" Which wasn't a question about my well-being. It was a subtle way of checking on the status of my bank account. I wasn't their daughter. I was their best investment. They had put in the bare minimum of parental effort, and now they expected a lifetime of returns. Every dollar I earned was, in their eyes, partly theirs. The breaking point should have been last year, when Leo decided to launch a lifestyle brand that consisted of 3 overpriced t-shirts and a dysfunctional website. When it inevitably failed, it left him with thousands of dollars in credit card debt. My mother called me in tears, a tactic she reserved for major withdrawals. "He's going to be ruined, Olivia. His credit will be destroyed. We can't let this happen. Think of the embarrassment." She didn't ask me to help. She told me it was my duty. I paid off his debt. I wrote the check, feeling sick to my stomach, knowing that I was not fixing a problem but funding a permanent state of irresponsibility. I was enabling the very behavior that kept him dependent and them in control. That single act had reset the standard. If I could pay off thousands in debt for Leo, then surely, I could afford a luxury vacation for the whole family. In their minds, it was a logical progression. They had no concept of boundaries, only of escalation. The cruise brochure sitting on the table wasn't just a request for money. It was a statement. It was the culmination of a decade of being treated like a corporate sponsor in the business of my own family. They had slowly, systematically, eroded my identity until all that was left in their eyes was a dollar sign. They didn't see Olivia, the daughter, the sister, the hardworking woman. They saw a resource that had not yet been fully tapped. And as I looked at their expectant faces, I realized this was my own fault. Not for being successful, but for allowing them to believe my success belonged to them. I had taught them how to treat me, and now I was drowning in the lesson. Looking back, the campaign for the cruise began weeks before the brochure ever hit the table. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a series of red flags I chose to ignore, mostly because acknowledging them was too exhausting. It started with my mother's phone calls. They became more frequent, and her tone shifted from its usual businesslike inquiry to a cloying, saccharine sweetness. "Just calling to see how my successful daughter is doing," she'd chirp, a phrase that was both a compliment and a reminder of my financial status. She'd ask pointed questions about my job, disguised as maternal interest. "How did that big presentation go? Is your boss happy with your work? Are they talking about bonuses this year?" She wasn't checking in on my happiness, she was assessing the health of her investment. Then, she launched phase 2, the guilt campaign. She began lamenting how we never spend any quality time together as a family anymore. She'd sigh dramatically over the phone, talking about other families, fictional or real, who were supposedly closer, better. "You know, the Millers from down the street just took their kids to Italy," she'd say, her voice dripping with implication. "It's just so important to make those memories while you can. We're not getting any younger." The subtext was clear, our lack of family memories was a problem, and I was the one with the resources to fix it. My brother, Leo, was her willing accomplice. He started texting me links to travel blogs and exotic resorts. "This place looks sick," he'd write, followed by a dozen emojis. He wasn't sharing an interest, he was submitting a wish list, treating me like his personal travel agent and benefactor. They worked in tandem, a pincer movement of emotional pressure. If my mother's guilt-tripping didn't work, Leo's casual, entitled suggestions would follow a few hours later. It was a coordinated effort to make a luxury vacation seem like a normal, reasonable, and necessary family expense, for me. A major red flag appeared when my mother casually mentioned a cruise during a phone call. "You know," she said, feigning an off-the-cuff thought, "I was thinking, a cruise might be nice someday. No cooking, no cleaning. Just relaxing. What do you think?" It was a test balloon, sent up to gauge my reaction. I gave a non-committal, maybe, hoping to shut it down. But my lack of an enthusiastic response didn't deter her. It only signaled that she needed to escalate her efforts. The final, most obvious red flag was the weekend before the brochure appeared. They invited me for dinner, and the whole evening was a transparent performance. My father, Gary, actually initiated a conversation. My brother offered to help with the dishes. My mother made my favorite lasagna, a dish reserved for birthdays and major holidays. It was classic love bombing, an overwhelming display of affection designed to soften me up, to make me feel cherished and indebted right before they made the big ask. The kindness felt so forced, so transactional, that it was suffocating. I sat at the dinner table, eating the lasagna, and felt a cold dread settle over me. This wasn't love. This was lobbying. They were buttering me up for a major withdrawal from the Bank of Olivia. I drove home that night with the taste of fake generosity in my mouth. I knew something was coming. I knew it would be big, and I knew it would be expensive. So when my mother slid that glossy brochure across the table a few days later, it wasn't a surprise. It was the predictable, infuriating climax of a weeks-long, meticulously planned campaign of emotional manipulation. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, gathering my strength. I looked at their 3 expectant faces, a united front of entitlement. I placed the glossy brochure back on the table, pushing it gently towards the center. It felt like declining a peace treaty I knew was a trap. "Mom, it's a lovely idea," I began, my voice even and calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. "But I'm not going to be able to pay for the entire family to go on a cruise. That's not something I can do." The change was instantaneous. My mother's warm, inviting smile didn't just fade, it shattered, replaced by a mask of cold, sharp fury. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "What do you mean, you can't?" she snapped, her voice losing all its sweetness. "Or do you mean you won't?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. She was framing my boundary as an act of selfish defiance. I was no longer the successful daughter, I was the ungrateful child who was withholding a rightful tribute. Before I could answer, my brother Leo scoffed from across the table. Seriously, Olivia? I don't get it, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. You have that huge apartment, you go out to nice dinners, but you can't help your own family have one nice vacation? What is the point of all that money if you're just going to hoard it? His words were designed to shame me, to paint me as a greedy villain who cared more about my lifestyle than my own blood. He completely ignored the fact that his one nice vacation was a luxury I was supposed to provide, while my apartment was something I had earned for myself. I looked to my father, hoping for a voice of reason, an ally. Instead, he cleared his throat and delivered the deepest betrayal. Your mother has a point, Olivia, he said, his tone one of grave disappointment. Family is supposed to support each other. We supported you for years. It's not wrong to expect some of that back. He had just confirmed it. Their love, their support, had never been a gift. It had been a loan, and they were here to collect, with interest. My entire childhood was being reframed as a long-term investment they now expected to cash in. The humiliation was a physical blow. They weren't just angry I had said no to paying. They were fundamentally offended that I had even considered my money my own. They truly believed they had a right to it. My mother, seeing she had her husband's backing, delivered the final, killing blow. She picked up the brochure and held it up, no longer an invitation but a weapon. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with ice. Be selfish. But this is a family trip. She paused for effect, her eyes boring into me. If you are unwilling to contribute to this family, then you have no place in it on this vacation. You don't have to worry about paying for your own ticket, Olivia, because you're no longer invited. And there it was. My inclusion in my own family was officially a conditional membership, and the annual dues were apparently the cost of a Caribbean cruise for 4. By refusing to pay, I had been summarily expelled. They stared at me, a silent, unified council that had just voted me off the island. I had been given a choice, be the bank or be an outcast. When I refused to be their ATM, they simply shut the door. The betrayal wasn't in the asking. It was in the punishment for saying no. I was being humiliated for having a boundary, for daring to believe that my success belonged to me. They had made their position perfectly clear, without my wallet, I was worthless to them. I don't remember the drive home. It was like my mind went on autopilot, a defense mechanism against the sheer force of the blow I had just received. All I remember is standing in the middle of my beautiful apartment, the one my brother had thrown in my face, and feeling nothing but a vast, echoing emptiness. The silence was a judge and jury, and it found me guilty. Guilty of selfishness. Guilty of being ungrateful. Guilty of wanting my own life. The 4 walls that were once my sanctuary, a symbol of my independence, now felt like a prison I had built for myself. The emotional dam finally broke. It wasn't a loud, screaming rage. It was a silent, gut-wrenching sob that felt like it was being torn from the deepest part of my soul. I slid down the wall, my body heavy with a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight. Every sacrifice, every late night at the office, every missed party, every ounce of effort I had poured into building this life, it had all been for this. To be told that none of it made me worthy. In fact, it had made me a target. My mother's cold, dismissive face was burned into my memory. My brother's sneering contempt. My father's look of grave disappointment. They were a unified council, and their verdict was unanimous, I was not enough. My love wasn't enough. Only my money would have been. I had spent years telling myself that I worked hard for me, for my own security and future. But a small, hopeful part of me always believed that my success would finally make them proud, that it would earn me a different kind of love, one without conditions, without an attached invoice. That hope was now a corpse at my feet. My success hadn't earned me their pride. It had only made me a bigger, more appealing bank to rob. It had transformed me from a daughter into a function, an asset on their personal balance sheet. I looked around my living room, at the art on the walls I had carefully chosen, the comfortable sofa I had saved for, the view of the city I had worked so hard to achieve. It all felt hollow, tainted. This was the life they resented me for, the life they felt entitled to. I built a kingdom they never wanted to visit, only to plunder. My home wasn't a place for them to share in my joy, it was a constant, glittering reminder of what they could take, of what they felt they were owed. The humiliation was so complete that it made me want to hide from the world. I called in sick to work the next day, the first time I had done so in years. I couldn't face my colleagues, my team, the world where I was respected and competent. My family's judgment had completely overshadowed it. I felt ashamed of my own success. It was a bizarre, twisted feeling. The very thing that should have been my greatest pride had become the source of my deepest shame. They had successfully weaponized my accomplishments against me. For a full day, I just drifted through my apartment like a ghost, ignoring calls from friends, unable to explain the specific, familial poison that was coursing through my veins. The world saw a successful woman. My family saw a failed daughter. And in the depths of that collapse, I started to believe them. I felt a crushing sense of loneliness, the kind that only comes from being rejected by the very people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. They had drawn a line in the sand. On one side was family. On the other was me. And the price of crossing that line was my soul, my wallet, and my self-respect. After a day spent hidden away in my apartment, I forced myself back into the world. I went to work, put on a brittle smile, and moved through my tasks like an automaton. The fire inside me, the ambition and drive that had defined my entire career, had been reduced to cold, gray ash. I was just going through the motions, my mind still replaying the scene in my parents' kitchen. My mother's icy dismissal, my brother's scorn. The feeling of being an outsider in my own life story was a constant, dull ache behind my ribs. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple, an important announcement regarding the president's circle. I almost archived it without reading, assuming it was another generic corporate memo about policy changes. But for some reason, my finger hovered over the mouse. I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the first few lines without any real interest. Dear Olivia, on behalf of the entire executive leadership team, it is with immense pleasure that we congratulate you. My brain started to catch up with the words. In recognition of your outstanding performance and leadership on the recent quarter's Keystone project, you have been selected as a 2025 inductee into the President's Circle. I blinked, reading the sentence again. The Keystone project. The project I had nearly killed myself over for 6 months, the one that had demanded late nights and weekends, the very time my family accused me of neglecting them. While they were plotting how to spend my money, I was earning this. A flicker of my old self, a spark of pride I thought was extinguished, ignited within me. All that work had been seen. It had been valued. Just not by the people who were supposed to care the most. The email went on to detail the award. It was the company's highest honor, given to the top 1% of employees. The prize was meant to reflect this prestige. It was an all-expenses-paid luxury trip for me and a guest. My heart was beating a little faster now. A trip. A real one. One that I had earned, not one that I was expected to finance. I scrolled down to the itinerary, my eyes scanning the details. A 7-day, all-inclusive Caribbean cruise. I kept reading, my breath catching in my throat. The ship's name. The departure date. The ports of call. It was the same one. The exact same cruise my family was going on. A bolt of pure, unadulterated shock went through me. But it got better. As a President's Circle winner, I wasn't just a passenger. I was a VIP. My accommodations were in the chairman's suites on a private, keycard access-only deck. The package included a personal concierge, priority everything, and access to exclusive lounges and restaurants. The universe wasn't just offering me a consolation prize. It was delivering a masterpiece of cosmic irony right to my inbox. My family had disowned me for not buying them a ticket to the party, and now my own merit had just handed me a key to the penthouse upstairs. The hollow ache in my chest was suddenly, miraculously, gone. It was replaced by a surging, electrifying feeling I couldn't immediately name. It was a cocktail of vindication, disbelief, and a profound, almost hysterical sense of justice. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in what felt like an eternity. The kingdom I had built, the one they wanted to plunder, had just given me a chariot and sent me to the exact same battleground. This was no longer their vacation story from which I had been exiled. It was my victory lap. And I had a front row seat. My revenge began not with a phone call, but with a single click. I replied to the corporate email with a calm, professional, I am thrilled to accept this honor. I didn't gloat, I didn't exclaim, I didn't tell a soul at work about the cosmic joke the universe had just played. This victory was mine, and I would savor it privately. For my +1, I didn't hesitate. I called my best friend, Sarah, the one person who had listened to every tearful phone call about my family for years. When I explained the situation, there was a moment of stunned silence on her end, followed by a peal of laughter so loud and joyous it felt like a healing balm. Olivia, she said, this isn't just a vacation. This is poetry. The weeks leading up to the cruise were a quiet, thrilling hum of preparation. I didn't feel the need to broadcast my plans. My family had cut me off, and their punishment of silence was the greatest gift they could have possibly given me. It gave me the space to plot in peace. My revenge was in the details. I went shopping, not out of necessity, but with a sense of purpose. I bought a stunning, deep red dress for the formal captain's dinner. I bought a chic, sophisticated swimsuit for the private VIP pool deck. Each purchase was an act of rebellion, a reclaiming of the success they had tried to turn into a source of shame. Meanwhile, on social media, my family was performing for their audience. My mother posted a picture of 4 cruise tickets, pointedly, only 4, with the caption, counting down the days to a much-needed, precious family getaway. #family first. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Leo posted a picture of a new suitcase, writing, time to get packing for paradise. So grateful for a family that makes memories together. Every post was a subtle, public dig at me, a reinforcement of the narrative that I had selfishly excluded myself. I just liked the posts silently, a ghost they thought they had banished. A week before the trip, a sleek black box arrived by courier from my company. Inside, nestled in velvet, were our travel documents, personalized luggage tags, and 2 heavy, black lanyards with the words VIP guest embossed in gold. I held the lanyard in my hand. It felt solid, substantial. It was a stark contrast to the flimsy, crumpled brochure my mother had shoved at me, the one that represented an invitation based on exploitation. This lanyard was different. It wasn't a ticket I had to buy to be included. It was a medal I had earned for my own merit. On the day of departure, Sarah and I took a car to the port. We bypassed the enormous, snaking lines of thousands of people waiting to check in. Our VIP status gave us a private entrance, a quiet, carpeted lounge where champagne was being served. Through the glass windows, I could see the chaos of the main terminal. And for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw them, my mother, father, and brother, standing in a long queue, looking hot and bothered. My heart didn't even flutter. They were just strangers now. My revenge wasn't about seeking a confrontation. It wasn't about throwing my success in their faces. It was simpler, and far more powerful. It was about honoring the vacation I had earned. It was about walking onto that ship, not as an outcast who had been disinvited, but as a VIP who belonged in a place they couldn't get to. I wasn't crashing their party. I was attending my own, and it was on a much better deck. They had built a wall to keep me out. They never imagined I would simply fly over it. The moment we stepped into our suite, I knew I had entered a different world. It was twice the size of the one my mother had circled in the brochure, with a sprawling private balcony, a fully stocked complimentary bar, and a welcome bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. My friend Sarah let out a low whistle. "Okay," she said, "this is officially the most glorious I told you so in human history." I couldn't help but laugh, a real, deep laugh that came from a place of pure, unadulterated joy. We spent the first afternoon exploring our exclusive territory. The private pool deck was serene, with plush loungers and attendants who brought us cool towels and drinks. From our peaceful perch, we could look down at the main pool deck, a chaotic, vibrant sea of people, loud music, and splashing children. And that's when I saw them. My family. They were navigating the crowded deck, my mother looking flustered, my father looking tired, and my brother Leo looking annoyed that all the best chairs were taken. They looked so small, so ordinary, so far away. They were fighting for a small patch of turf in a world I was floating above. The main event happened on the second night, at the formal captain's dinner. I wore my new red dress, feeling a sense of power and confidence I had never known. Sarah and I were seated at a prime table with my boss, Mr. Harrison, and a few other executives. The conversation was easy, respectful, and centered on our collective achievements. Halfway through the appetizer, I saw them being led to a small table in the crowded main section. My mother's eyes were scanning the room, likely looking for people to impress. And then her gaze landed on me. Her fork, halfway to her mouth, stopped dead. Her jaw went slack. Her face cycled through a universe of emotions in 5 seconds, utter, dumbfounded shock, then white-hot fury, then a slow, dawning, deeply humiliating understanding. Leo followed her gaze, his expression a mixture of confusion and raw, childish jealousy. My father just looked down at his menu, as if hoping it would swallow him whole. They were staring at a ghost they thought they had successfully exorcised, now dining with the gods at the head of the room. Mr. Harrison, noticing my gaze, glanced over. "Olivia, do you know those people?" he asked casually. I took a calm sip of my wine, met my mother's horrified stare for a single, powerful beat, and then turned back to my boss with a polite smile. "Yes," I said simply. "That's my family." I offered no explanation. I didn't get up. I didn't acknowledge them further. I simply returned to my conversation, my laughter, my life. I had dismissed them. In the most public way possible, I had shown them that their drama, their anger, their very presence, was no longer important enough to command my attention. They wanted me to pay for their ticket. Instead, my success became the price of their admission to watch my life from a distance. That was the thought that echoed in my mind for the rest of the trip. For the next 5 days, they were shadows at the edge of my perfect vacation. I would see them in the distance, waiting in line for the buffet while an attendant escorted me to a private dining room. I would see them craning their necks to get a glimpse of the exclusive deck I was lounging on. On the final night, I stood on my private balcony, looking out at the endless, dark ocean, the stars scattered like diamonds above. I wasn't looking back at the crowded decks of the ship. I was looking forward. The black VIP lanyard, my medal of honor, was cool against my skin. It was a reminder that my value was never up for their negotiation. I had built my own kingdom, and it turned out, it had a much better view.